in the New Testament, Jesus is casting out demons a lot, and he tells the apostles to do that as well. And I feel like nowadays we don't hear about exorcisms very much. And if someone says, they believe in an exorcism or they believe someone should have an exorcism performed on them, they're deemed crazy and old-fashioned.
Mm-hmm.
Are exorcisms still happening? And how do we know if someone should?
That's an excellent question. I want to just first make just a little historical note. There was a really interesting study. I wish I could remember the name of the author who did it, but I remember reading about it. An interesting study done by a church historian who argued that the single greatest influence on the pagan world that early Christians had that resulted in the most conversions to Christianity was not the miracles of healing, not because of, other things, but it was precisely because Christian priests had the power to cast out demons. And that, by and large, was the most impressive and significant thing the pagan world saw about Christianity, because the pagan world was really suffused with the dominion of the devil. They've been worshiping false gods. There are all sorts of possessed people who are oppressed, and so forth. And therefore, it turns out that more than anything, it was the exorcisms that actually brought about a mass conversion to the Christian faith. It was a really interesting study, and that rings true to me. So, answering your question, do exorcisms still happen? Absolutely they do. You may not hear about them. I, as a priest, I certainly hear about them a lot more than ordinary people. I've known a number of cases of people who are actually possessed or suffering from some other lesser form of demonic oppression or obsession. But I know a number of cases like that. And in fact, exorcisms do still happen. I still remember there was a really funny meme I saw, and it had a picture of a Catholic priest with a crucifix, looking very somber, and it said, "Everyone makes fun of Catholic priests until they're possessed by a demon." And then they come running for the Catholic priest. So they do still happen. A really great book to read on that is Father Gabriel Amorth, who's just passed away. He's a saintly priest. I met him in Rome. I remember having a wonderful 2-hour-long conversation with him. He was the lead exorcist in Rome. I think there's 9 exorcists in Rome. And they were working full time. So Father Amorth, for 8 or 10 hours a day was doing exorcisms there. And every diocese is supposed to have an exorcist. So they are still happening. But the reason why they're kept private is largely because people don't want other people to know they're possessed by demons, And therefore you can understand why people, to respect their privacy, they've kept it kind of under wraps and to prevent kind of sensationalism. But they still do happen. So then, going to the second part of your question, how do we know that someone needs an exorcism? There's a whole series of kind of tried and true tests or standards that are used in order to determine whether or not someone is actually possessed by a demon or suffering one of the other types of demonic influence, either oppression or obsession. Possession is the most serious. And first of all, there's a number of tests that look to see whether or not someone is suffering from just a mental problem, because a lot of people, they think that it's demonic, but it's really just mental illness. I remember one exorcist I knew, he opened a book and he was reading this book over in Latin over this woman, and she starts going into into convulsions and everything, and he was reading Cicero. He wasn't doing the exorcism right. So he had a good idea that she wasn't really possessed by a demon, so there are certain indications. But some signs, let me give you some objective signs that someone would look for. A, they have knowledge of foreign languages that they shouldn't know, they never studied, or learned. B, they have knowledge of hidden things. For example, they could tell you, you go outside, put something in your pocket, and then come back in, and they could tell you, yeah, here's what's in your pocket, because the demons like to show off their knowledge. Sometimes they levitate during the course of an exorcism or before one. There's preternatural strength. So there are a number of different things that are objective things that can't be explained in terms of mental illness, and then you would look to some of those things in order to determine whether or not someone was actually under the influence of an actual demon. But again, I would read Father Amorth's An Exorcist Tells His Story in order to get some background on that and just see exorcisms are real. And I'll be honest with you, there's a huge uptick in demonic influence because we've entered into a post-Christian world. And like the pre-Christian world,
Yeah.
the demons have a lot of influence and people are worshiping false gods. People are getting into Wicca. They're getting into New Age things. They're opening their souls to the devil, and more possessions are taking place.